All right, welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and it is that time again, another Motor Week retro review reaction. And this week, the fire-breathing 1991 Toyota Tercel. Now, you know, when I saw a cheap little underpowered car from the 90s, it had to be done. But I have a lot of affection for this car and a little bit of a story behind it. It was a influential car in my automotive history. So, as always, grab your beverage of choice. Today we've got water. Yes, I use the same cup for everything. And sit back in your comfy chair. Let's take a little trip down memory lane.
Motorweek is made possible by TireRack.com, RockAuto.com, State Farm, and WeatherTech.
There was a time when economy car meant just that. A bare-bones automobile that provided the most basic transportation for the least expense, like a Yugo. But in recent years, many such models have moved upmarket. Cars like the Mazda Protege and Nissan Sentra have redefined the economy car class. The latest car to join this trend is the Toyota Tercel. Like its competitors, it's a lot more car than its predecessor ever was. But does it still provide the economy and utility that people buy these cars for? Well, we gave...
Okay, so, sorry, bad pause there, but before they get into it any deeper, I've never been a fan of the Tercel, the older versions through the 80s. I'd seen the Corollas and, of course, the Camrys and the whatever it was above that. But the Tercel was just never enough car. I mean, when you're driving Buicks, you step down into an old Tercel. Didn't like them. This one, I dig it. The rounded styling, the aero styling, it doesn't look like a Camry of the 90s, but you can see some of the same design language overall. I always thought this was a really good-looking car. I don't want to overstate that too much. It's not gorgeous by any stretch, but I think it's handsome, composed, a little minimalistic. I really dig it. It doesn't go too far of being eggy, but it isn't too squared off as to be boring. I always thought it was pretty good looking. Now, it's funny to look back at this, and man, there's a lot of Nissan in the front of this car right here, in the grille and in the headlights. I love that it's got steel wheels. I like it. I dig it. So let's get into it.
Gave it the full Motor Week treatment to find out. The new Tercel is certainly a rounder car than its predecessor ever was. Upon seeing the first pictures that Toyota released, some Motor Week staffers expressed the opinion that it looked like an egg. And then Toyota made the mistake of sending us a white test car. The grade A small economy car jokes have been flying around the office ever since. But behind all the jokes has been a growing admiration for the little Tercel and the conclusion that Toyota engineers have produced yet another fine product.
And I like the back of it here. I like that the rear deck is pretty high. You end up with a kind of squared off trunk little area there. It makes it look not too weak and would increase the luggage space. When this was new, I agree. It was so rounded as to be a joke. I think that's hilarious. It's grade A. But I like the little character line down the side. It's all just, well, it's cheap, right? It's minimalist because they didn't have a lot of money for a lot of shaping and of the metal and everything else. But I think the end result is something that's quite handsome. Look how big that rear window is. Look how dainty the front A-pillar is, right? They just ended up with a really good-looking car. And where I was going with that was, if you looked at this and you're like, wow, look how rounded and egg-like it is, hang around for a few decades and see what we end up doing.
Toyota's most basic car line starts out costing only $6,588 for a two-door Tercel. Prices climb gradually until the buyer reaches our top-of-the-line LE test car, which has a base price of $9,478. With options, our car comes to $10,813. power for the Tercel.
Whoa, 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 whoa. I know that we have to adjust for 30 years of inflation, right? But wow, that they couldn't make enough of these. I think if they were close to that price. It's interesting. Once more about the styling, the front end looks like a lot of Nissans, and then in profile, I'll be darned if it didn't look a little bit like a Civic, squished down a little bit. A lot of other influences going on in this styling, whether they were leading the way or if it was just coincidence, it doesn't matter. But you could take the labels off this and change a few styling things, wheels and things like that, and I think you could pass this off as several different kinds of cars. Anyway, let's see the power.
Tercel comes from the same 1.5-liter four-cylinder that powered last year's car, but it trades its carburetor for fuel injection, gaining 4 horsepower for a total of 82. Torque is also up slightly to 90 pound-feet. Transmissions include a 4-speed manual on the base two-door, a 3-speed automatic, and our car's 5-speed manual. 2,035 pounds of front-wheel drive Tercel reaches 60 in 11.1 seconds and closes out the quarter mile in 18.2 seconds at 77 miles per hour. Hardly sports car performance, but we know a couple of luxury sedans that won't do better. But that same Tercel turned in mileage any car would die for.
Before they get to it, engine, respect the engine. 1.5 liters in 91, that just strikes me as kind of small. I think it's competitive, but adding fuel injection and only getting 4 horsepower out of it, that surprises me. I've never really done a study of it, right? But every time you hear about people having an engine and then they go to fuel injection, it always felt like a bigger jump than that. So that sounds very, very modest. 90 horsepower, 90 foot-pounds, 82 horsepower, and an 11.1, 0 to 60. It's an economy car. Love to say something about how slow that is, but it's an economy car.
For us, a consistent 39 miles per gallon over several days of mostly city driving. That's even higher than the EPA mileage ratings of 35 city, 37 highway. We characterize the Tercel's highway ride as pleasant, and interior sound levels measure a reasonable 69 decibels. As expected, power is concentrated down low, feeding through a typically vague Econobox clutch and a slick 5-speed manual shift linkage that impressed us with its short, precise throws and light feel. Handling is accomplished by McPherson struts in front and torsion beams in the rear. The package produces lots of plow and tire scrub when pushed through our slalom. But that's not the whole story. Normal street driving impressed us with the Tercel's stability. And while the soft suspension produces lots of body roll, the tiny Toyota produces surprising levels of traction through long, fast corners. This was also evident during our emergency maneuver test, where the car plowed heavily but never released its grip on the pavement. The optional power steering is moderately quick and provides good feedback, though the pump sometimes lags behind in hard cornering. The Tercel's brakes are disc in the front, drums in the rear. They stop the car from 60 in an average distance of 132 feet. Good pedal feel makes them easy to control, though they will lock when hot. Stability is very good. We're also very...
Before they get to the interior, that is... all of that is pretty impressive, to tell you the truth. Lots of body roll, right? But... the rear end, like they mentioned, neat and tidy through everything. We've seen a lot of cars that look a lot worse than that. And this is a cheap car. Braking, nothing to write home about. That's a little long, but if you look at how narrow those tires were, 132, again, we've seen a lot worse. And so that's not bad. It really isn't. And what I'll really focus on is they said it was stable, right? How many cars, now it's more in the 80s, how many cars have we seen where you have to lock the brakes up to get it to stop and then it gets squirrely or it wants to slide or something? Just a nice result from what is really pedestrian underpinnings. That tells me exactly what you would think about Toyota from this era. They sweated those details to get it right. And while they didn't end up with a little hot hatch, they ended up with something that was pleasant on the highway and feels good while you're driving it. Let's keep going, because again, I've got a story here.
Fond of the Tercel's interior. The round form of the car's exterior is carried over on the dash. Light from the large windscreen washes the semi-gloss plastic, highlighting the huge air vents and prominent gauge pod. The dash has a seamless look that is a total departure from the pieced-together design of previous Tercels. One thing Toyota did not change on the Tercel are the clean, simple gauge faces. We only wish there were more of them. Toyota has also removed the low buck stigma from the Tercel's seats. While some of our staff found them a little on the hard side, they provide good back support. We would like more side support, but the bottom cushions are longer than in most EconoBox models. Adjustments are naturally all manual, and passive restraint is by way of automatic belts. Control design and placement is straightforward and most correct. The center dash includes high-mounted ventilation controls that work as good as they look. Just below, but not too low, is the radio. On our car, an optional AM/FM cassette unit with good sound and reception. The egg-like shape that we joke so much about does offer lots of interior space, both front and rear, although backseat legroom is at a premium. Our LE also features a 60/40 split folding seatback for extra cargo space. This is in addition to an already respectable 10.7 cubic foot trunk. Liftover is low, making loading easy.
You know, a lot to like there. I don't love the dash. The instrument pod actually at the bottom kind of juts out a little bit. I don't know. I don't really like it. I'm not a fan of circular vents. They really bother me in like the current Chevy Blazer and things like that, and with the Camaro, I guess. And here, I don't know. I don't love them. I just don't feel very strongly about them. Everything else, you know, they didn't really say it, but like the radio, the buttons are big enough to do with gloves on. And the HVAC controls, about as cheap as you could do it. Screen print it right here, and then just basic sliders around it. But it worked, and it's intuitive, and it's high. Really smart. But the big thing is that one-piece dash. No squeaks and rattles and a bunch of assembly, just one big piece. It's cheap plastic in a cheap car, but it's a very holistic view of the dashboard. I always liked it in person.
Of hits for the Tercel is a long one, and it includes its reasonable price and respectable all-around performance. We also like its good gas mileage, comfortable ride, roomy interior, and the straightforward design of dash controls. Misses are but two, a too vague clutch and too few gauges. Safety-wise, the Tercel lacks any airbags but does have rear shoulder belts. Anti-lock brakes are not expected in such an inexpensive car. You can get ABS in the Nissan Sentra, but it's on the GXE, with a price that begins where the Tercel stops. Even the base Sentra cost about $1,000 more than a comparable Tercel, but the Nissan does come with a larger engine. The Sentra is larger than the Tercel both inside and out, but doesn't offer as smooth a highway ride. Ford Escort prices also begin higher than the Tercel, and it is slightly faster to boot. The Escort offers hatchback and wagon body styles the Tercel lacks, but it lags behind the Toyota in interior design and highway ride. So what makes the Tercel so special? That is, besides its egg-shaped personality. Perhaps it is the fact that, like all Toyota products, the whole is always more than the sum of its parts. The Tercel is the up-to-date definition of affordable, economical, basic transportation with a level of security and reliability that only comes from owning a Toyota. This kept the last Tercel at peak popularity for its entire 4-year lifespan. We're confident that the 1991 Toyota Tercel will be a sellout too. It's a great little economy car.
All right, so let's go back real quick and the trunk, right? 10 cubic feet doesn't sound like a lot, but look at how the space was used when they put in actual luggage, and it was still tall. And then they wisely did not penny pinch split folding rear seats so you could have more space. They spent the money where it really meant something. Then at the end, when they were comparing it to the Sentra and the Escort, I don't have dimensions in front of me, but I've always thought of the Tercel as a class below those two. But isn't it interesting that even though they both cost more, their highway ride was not as good as the Tercel? So even though it feels like, to me anyway, it's a lower line, a smaller class car, which should be more jittery on a highway, they actually gave it better marks. And so this all kind of reinforces how I feel about this generation of Tercel. And the story I have is, if you remember, or if you're new here, welcome. My first vehicle was a 76 Buick. And then I bought my first Jeep, which I had for a year and was horrible. And then I bought my second Buick, an 83, as I recall, Buick. And around that time, I had a buddy of mine in college. And his car, I think it was a Nissan as a matter of fact, had to go into the shop, and he ended up with a loaner, or his car was wrecked and he ended up with a rental car, right? Whatever it was. And he was really disappointed he got a Tercel. He hated it because it was a cheap little car. But I had a chance to spend some time with that car. And having had American cars and a Jeep, and then my family had American cars, and most of my friends had American cars, to get into a brand new Toyota, it was an eye-opening experience. It rode good. It was spacious. It didn't have a lot of power, but it was kind of zippy, right? That, I don't know, almost British approach of, we don't have a ton of power, but it's kind of fun to drive. And that front dash absolutely blew my mind, because that was nothing like what you saw in the American cars I had had experience with up to that point. This car was a cheap econobox meant to get great gas mileage, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I couldn't swing one at the time because I had a Buick, and when I replaced the Buick, I ended up with my Volkswagen, because these still held their value so well. So it was this cheap little econobox that my 19-year-old, probably 20-year-old self was like, wow, this is kind of cool. So yeah, the Tercel is part of what got my mind changing to thinking, hey, there's something to all these Japanese cars. It was eye-opening to me, and I have very, very fond memories of this car. Would love to drive one again and just see how darkly tinted my rose-colored glasses are. But thanks for spending a few minutes with me. I hope you enjoyed this one about one of the most boring cars I could possibly think of, but meant something to me. Let me know any comments below, guys. Thanks for being here.